a rotten hooker.
I thought I was a good Christian.
I go to church every Sunday.
I thought I was a good Christian.
I go to church every Sunday. I'm a very religious person.
I thought I was a good Christian.
The very lies the serpent told to Eve in the Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and
Hey everybody, it is Friday, March 16th. This Non-Religious Life, I'm your host, Ken. With me all the way across the country in Norfolk, Virginia, we have Bob.
How's it going?
And
Okay.
Jason.
Oh, sorry, wrong one.
Different
Wrong
Bob.
one.
Oh boy.
I can't even distinguish you guys with last names either, you know? We have two Robert Prices here.
You're kidding.
Yes. Which
Wow.
I think is an interesting point that'll be germane to the discussion that we want to have.
You bet it is. Yes. Yeah.
And once again with us we have Dr. Robert Price.
That's you, Dr.
That's you.
Price.
A name that will live in infamy.
So
And
we've
me.
had a little...
Hi, I'm here.
You forgot Jason.
No, I said Jason.
You did not.
I said Jason first.
Nope.
And then...
No, did not happen. But anyway,
Okay.
I'll cry in silence over here.
We
We're
have
all
Jason
here.
too. All right, so I guess let's get into the good stuff. Was there anything you guys wanted to cover first? Or do you want to dive straight into this?
Not
I know-
so much. I just want to say that we had somebody post a critical comment regarding our podcast that we lack academic credibility, and I don't think that is the case anymore. We have Dr. Robert Price on the show, and I think his academic credentials are impeccable.
That's good. You think so? Some folks.
I don't claim to have academic credibility on this show. It really is just us pontificating for like an hour on end for, once a week. But this should be a good one because I actually did research before the show.
Yay.
Yay! I know Bob did have a question for other Bob.
Yeah.
So let's.
Well, in the previous comment, we were discussing the Trinity, and somebody posted that our understanding of the Trinity itself is just way off base and lacking academic merit. So I thought I would ask Dr. Robert Price if he could give us a little 5-minute seminar on what we should know about the Trinity.
5 minutes.
The Trinity is hard to have a proper idea of, since explicitly it is not an idea but a kind of regulatory concept or rubric or something. Because to be as sympathetic as I can toward the idea, everyone has always admitted that the Trinity is supposed to be a divine mystery, that the Godhead obviously must transcend any human capability of understanding, or it would be an idol. It would be fake. If you could understand it, it wouldn't be much of. I mean, just think of what you're talking about, an infinite being and all of that. I like the old parable of the blind men and the elephant from Buddhism, that the divine reality, if such there be, would have to be so incomprehensible you could only speak of it insofar as you had encountered it. And the Trinity is sort of like the blind men and the elephant. It says, look, we can say, for whatever it's worth, that there is a single God or Godhead, a divine entity, and that he seems to exist in three forms, three personae, and the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, who are equal and equally divine, but not three gods. How that is, we don't know. It's no surprise that we don't know, but we have reason to believe it's so from the way the Scripture talks about the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. Now, some folks might say, well, let's just cut to the chase here and say that you've got one God who reveals himself in three ways, and the Father, Son, and Spirit are just ways of talking about these modes of manifestation. And the old analogy that is supposed to articulate the Trinity does not, the one that says it's like water. It can exist as a liquid, a gas, or a solid, but it's the same stuff. No, that's not Trinitarianism, that's modalism. God has three ways of revealing himself, but Trinitarianism says that's not adequate. There is somehow a true multiplicity in the Godhead. Well, you could go to the other oversimplification and say, oh, okay, that means divine nature is like human nature. It's really just a category. If I say that Larry, Moe, and Curly share the essence of stoogeness, that means there are three stooges. If Tom, Dick, and Harry have human nature, it means we got three humans. Why not say that the Father, Son, and Spirit sharing divine nature are three gods, like Apollo, Hermes, and Zeus? No, that's an oversimplification. It would make sense, but it's inadequate. We just don't quite know how it can be, but there appear to be three divine persons who have always been distinct and sharing somehow the divine nature, which is more substantial than human nature, which is just a kind of a category. Now, to me, that is probably just a bad theory rather than a genuine mystery. It's because I don't, I'm sympathetic with it, but I don't believe there's enough prior reason to posit that it's true. If it, again, I grant, if you had reason to believe there was such a thing as a divine entity, then you might go this way. But in fact, I think it's just a historical theological compromise, because they began with, on the traditional view, monotheistic Judaism, but exalted Jesus to such a degree that he virtually became a second God, but they couldn't give up monotheism, and they said there just must be more to it we don't get. And then somehow the Holy Spirit was factored into it, though I think that was not supposed to be a personal agent originally, and isn't in most of the Bible. I think, however, even that may be a piece of apologetics. I tend to think that Judaism in its popular forms was still polytheistic, and that Margaret Barker is right, and that the Father in the New Testament is supposed to be El Elyon, the King of Gods in the Old Testament, while Jesus was supposed to be Yahweh, having appeared on earth as he had in the past. And the Spirit, well, who knows, but it was, in effect, polytheism, and they tried to make it more like Jewish monotheism. Even today, Jews and Muslims will say, well, you Christians would like to be monotheists, but you're confused. You have to really work the bugs out of that. And I think they're right, but that's just my sense of it. That's about all I know of the Trinity, though.
Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that answer, because I think that just illustrates that, the more we look at it, those sort of traditional ideas of monotheism, they fall away when you look behind the curtain.
Yeah.
And then you get accused of not doing your homework because you don't have an understanding. But when actually you've demonstrated that you looked a little further and you just have a better understanding than folk understanding.
Yeah, the problem I have with the folk understandings, there are the two Christian ones, the thing that implies modalism, though they don't realize it. They think the water, ice, vapor thing is a good illustration of the Trinity. It's not. And similarly, they say it's like three light bulbs in a room all giving off the same light. That's another problem. That's more like tritheism. So one problem with Trinitarianism is you can't really be a Trinitarian if it's a concept you're supposed to hold, because you're just left with a kind of a Zen koan. How can three be one? And yet I want to veer away from the pop village atheist view that it's just stupidity and that idiots think three are one and one is three. It's a bit more of a proposition than that. It really has to do with whether you think there is prior reason to posit this infinite and inconceivable entity. If there's a God, that's what it would have to be. But is there a reason to think so? So there's an Achilles heel there, but it's not that it's just idiots don't know their math, as you often hear.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
and I'd like to say we never accused anybody of that.
Oh, no, I don't know what you've said about it, but I often have heard that. Look at these dopes. How can three be one? It's not that simple. It may not be true. I personally don't think it is, but you have to take a wider view of the matter.
Yeah.
I feel like it ended up being they sort of painted themselves into a corner with it.
Exactly.
They wanted Christ to be a god too, and they ended up with this. It's nonsensical. You have to just keep, talking, because if you stop talking and stop defining it, then it becomes a tangible thing, and it always ends up being some sort of heretical thing that they say it's not.
Exactly.
Modalism or tritheism or something beyond that.
A friend of mine once said, you want to know what the Trinity means? Oh, I'll tell you. The Trinity means sit down and shut up.
That's terrible.
I like that.
But even that doesn't go against what I said. It's possible that it's like this profound Buddhist parable where the six blind men, congenitally blind, are curious about what an elephant is. They've heard of them. They live in India. So somebody brings them to a stall where an elephant is kept, and they fan out around the thing and converge on it. And the one guy picks up holds on to the tusk of the elephant. He says, "What do you know? An elephant is like a spear." The guy next to him happens to grab the ear and says, No, you're crazy. The elephant is like a fan. The next guy picks up the trunk and says, "No, an elephant is like a snake." And the next one feels the side of it and says, "No, the elephant is like a wall." The next one puts his arms around the leg and says, "No, the elephant is like a tree." Well, they go home arguing. I think they're all crazy, but they're all right. Their error is thinking they have experienced all there is to experience of it. They can't see it. They can't see the whole. They only see parts, and it doesn't occur to them to grant that what the other has experienced is equally true. There's just too much to it for one person to take in. And I think that is what Trinitarians are trying to say. Look, we don't pretend to understand this. It would become, like you said, an idol, an oversimplification, if we came up with some neat theory that did make all kinds of sense. They like to compare it to the quantum physics thing. Well, wait a minute. If you look at it this way, it's like a particle. If you look at it that way, it's like a wave. We don't know what's going on there yet. Maybe we will, but we don't know. But it does seem like it's a particle sometimes, or behaves like a wave others. I have some respect for that. I just can't go with them far enough to find that it's a real problem. Like you said, I think it was just a kind of pieced together compromise.
Yeah,
That's
I like
good.
it when the answer starts out with, "Well, it's more complicated if you look at it."
But some things are. Now, I think this is just a bad theory, but there are some things where you know enough about it to have Socratic humility and say, boy, there is just way too much to this. I look at any kind of mathematics that way personally. My eyes glaze over. I can make no sense of it. And so I have a certain respect for Trinitarianism, but I just don't think, I think you can see the cracks in it. As you were saying, that it seems like they painted themselves into a corner, and it was kind of an ad hoc hypothesis to save the appearances of a random theological growth, and so they're kind of making too much out of it. But if you just take it by itself, it isn't stupid. They say we're trying to stop stupidity here. We're trying to say this is like what the psalmist says, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. I have some respect for Socratic humility. I just think they're probably on the wrong track on this.
All right. So the big reason, not to steer away from the Trinity, because I bet we could talk about that all day. But the big reason we had you on the show is the professor from, what is he, from the University of North Carolina, and he's the chair of religious
Charlotte.
studies.
Mm-hmm.
James
He's the chair
Tabor.
of the religious studies department.
Yeah, and that's not short for charlatan, as some might say.
James Tabor, he's the chair of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and his new book is coming out, or it's hit the streets this week, which is the Jesus Discovery, and it's a follow-up to his previous book, The Jesus Dynasty. And him and another guy, a filmmaker, had the documentary in 2007, The Lost Tomb of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys are holding up the what's known as the Talpiot tomb in Jerusalem as evidence of a historical Jesus. And then the guy goes on and almost like like it was like something out of the Da Vinci Code, where he's making this case that this was Jesus' family. He had brothers, a child. He was married to Mary Magdalene. And ooh, look, here's his tomb that we've just uncovered in Jerusalem. And then now his follow-up book, they have another tomb that they discovered that's just a couple meters away from the lost tomb of Jesus, and they're calling this one the patio tomb. And they have some new evidence that's come out of the patio tomb that they says strengthens their case for the lost tomb of Jesus. The documentary, I watched it yesterday. There's a lot of problems with it.
Yeah,
This is the one from 2007.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is a real problem in number one, that this hinges on the James ossuary, which they surmise had been taken from this, that there was at least one niche where this would have been. But it seems like that's just one of several fakes that this man that claimed he bought it from somebody made in the back room. The cops burst in on him and found he had a relic forging lab in the back of his apartment, and that he had come up with other fakes before, and all sorts of scrutiny of this thing has indicated that, as the Israeli Antiquities Authority ruled, that it's spurious. It is an ancient ossuary, but the inscription on it appears to be fake. And even if it were not, there's another problem in that the thing that got him on the trail of this was that these bones are said to belong to one Jacob or James, the son of Joseph, the brother of Yeshua or Jesus, but that those two epithets are apparently from different people. The handwriting is different. That destroys it right there, in my opinion. It could be that somebody decided to get more specific with the facts and add on, well, he wasn't just the son of Joseph, he's the brother of Jesus. But you immediately have to suspect that somebody has added that in order to make it look that way, even if it was an ancient person. So the fact that it's a different hand, to me, destroys the identification, even if it is genuinely ancient. But the third huge problem, in my opinion, is, I guess you could say, statistical. There's a sleight of hand maneuver going on here. If you say, now, of course, plenty of people had these names, Mariam and Jacob and Yeshua and so forth. But how often would you find a cluster of precisely these names which match Jesus's relatives as listed in the New Testament, plus Mary Magdalene, who is so closely associated with Jesus that many have always suspected that they were married, though that's all it is. It's a popular inference, but let's grant them that. Yeah, there are plenty of people with these names, but how often would you find a cluster of several of these names that match? That might be true, but you, and like you said, one of you and I have the same name. What does that tell you? Nothing. But let's suppose that there might be a good point in that. They then say, well, what do you know? There are a few other names which must indicate that at least one of these is the son of Jesus and Mary. I said, wait a second. Didn't you just argue that it was the precise combination of names here that matches the Jesus family unit from the Gospel of Mark? Now you're saying, oh no, there were more names than that, some we never heard of, I think of Sarah and so forth. Well, then you're saying it doesn't precisely match, right? So which is it? It seems to me they're sort of having their cake and eating it too. You can't trade on the supposed exact correspondence of these names, which would lift it beyond the slush pile of random ancient Hebrew names, and say, and there are more than that. If there are more than that, you don't have a precise correspondence, and it probably is just chance. So I've had a problem with that from the word go. Plus, James Tabor, though he is a brilliant man, I've met him, I like him, I think highly of him. I do methodologically differ with him in that, like the Da Vinci Code people and all of these similar things with the Templars and the Ark of the Covenant, he tends to think, or like the Holy Blood, Holy Grail thing. Those guys were supposedly trying to do historical research, but the method in all these things is, gee, what if A were B and B were C and C were D? Wow, that would be something. So what the heck? Let's say it is. Look, hey, wait a minute. That's how you start writing a novel, but that's not necessarily a historical hypothesis. And Tabor gets into this, like how they say that in Jewish polemic from long ago, they said that Jesus was not the son of any guy named Joseph. It was a Roman legionary named Pandera, and that's very likely a kind of a nasty pun on the Parthenos, son of the Virgin. But there were plenty of Roman soldiers that were called Pandera, the Panther. It was a nickname a lot of them had. Well, it's possible, that's true, but it seems late and legendary. But Tabor points to I think a memorial stone that shows a Roman soldier named something or other Pandera, I believe over near the Danube, and says, is this the actual father of Jesus? There's a chance of that, but there's a chance I might win the lottery. There's just no reason to think so. It's just, again, if A equals B and B equals C and C equals D, well, then you'd really have something. But we just don't know any of that. It's all supposition and guesswork, it seems to me, though I confess I do not know what the new evidence he's picked up is.
Well, the new evidence is they stuck. I read his paper about it last night, and they stuck a camera down into the adjacent tomb, which is they call it the patio tomb, and they looked at the ossuaries in there, and on one of them they found an inscription on the side of the ossuary that has, as they translated, has references to a resurrection. And then there's another ossuary that has what they say is the drawing of a fish, which is a reference to the Jonah story, and then how the Jonah survived 3 days in the belly of the fish, meaning death, and then he was vomited onto dry land, meaning resurrection or rebirth, and that. And somehow from that they build the case that the tomb complex itself, even though they're distinct tombs and not connected, that the tomb complex itself belonged to Joseph of Arimathea, and that these weren't tombs for just Jesus's family, but for the immediate, their little clan of followers. And I think it's fallen apart, and I think that they're looking at any evidence they can get and doing some academic hand waving to cover up the failings of their findings from the first tomb. Because
are they saying this one of these ossuaries was that of Jesus?
In the first tomb, which is called the Garden Tomb, which was the subject of that 2007 documentary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they maintain that one of those ossuaries contains the bones of Jesus.
That's what I thought. Then how can there be any reference to a resurrection?
There's a second tomb that's, I don't know, maybe they said it's 4 or 5 meters away. It's very nearby, and they looked in on that one with cameras, and on one of the ossuaries there, they see an inscription that has something to do about resurrection, and then the what they say is a picture of a fish with a man in its mouth. And they're saying that this new evidence, this new tomb, reinforces their case for the first tomb.
But isn't that a gross contradiction? You are proclaiming the resurrection of the guy whose bones are in the one next door?
Well, they do a little bit of hand waving about that, and they say that the ancient Jews believed in a spiritual resurrection, not just the resurrection of the flesh.
Oh, brother. There's some evidence for that in 1 Corinthians 15, which, however, doesn't have much to do with Judaism, and 1 Peter, but it's that seems. I don't know what he's trying to prove. I don't think he's like an apologist trying to prove the resurrection happened. I suppose that would be even more incompatible, but. I don't know. To me, that seems far-fetched, though I suppose it's possible. You wonder if the Jonah thing was not supposed to be a general symbol for resurrection. If that's even what it means. The fish was a popular symbol for long before Christianity. I suppose it's conceivable, but it just seems to me it's guesswork. Somebody long ago pointed out some inscriptions in a Jerusalem tomb, one of which said, Jesus, let him rise, or Jesus, may he rise. I've seen it rendered both ways. And they said, now this means that someone very early, before the fall of Jerusalem, was praying to Jesus so that whoever this was might rise on the last day. That's certainly not unreasonable. And you wonder, however, if it is simply the person buried was named Jesus, and of course there were a denarius a dozen back then, and you're saying, may this man named Yeshua rise in the last day. It's not necessarily addressed to him. And these things are just so ambiguous. It's just... I don't know. It's possible, but that's all you can say, really. And why would it be? Well, yeah, Joseph of Arimathea, right? Not Jesus. Some have said Jesus' family wouldn't be buried in Jerusalem. They all lived in Galilee. But Joseph was a Jerusalemite, if he did exist. I tend to think he's actually a Christian rewrite of either Josephus the historian, Joseph bar Matthias. That's an old theory, or that he's supposed to be a Jewish version of Priam, who begged the body of Hector from Achilles, as Dennis MacDonald argues. But those are just possibilities, too. But if you assume he was a historical figure, you got to wonder why he would have to collect the whole set. That seems implausible to me. Why is he interested in burying Jesus at all? Well, Matthew and John have him be a disciple. And so, all right, he might have had some interest, but Luke follows Mark, our earliest gospel, in just making him a pious Jew who wanted to see that a fellow Jew received a decent burial. And it's just inconceivable that he'd wait and collect the bones of the surviving members of Jesus' family years or decades later from Galilee. It just seems ridiculous to me. So.
Well, that's kind of what they maintain, and I think that they bring in Joseph of Arimathea to do, I guess, some hand waving, because in the original tomb, even though they say that it was the Jesus family tomb, there's no family member of Matthew, even though Matthew was one of the disciples. And so they say, like, oh, well, Joseph of Arimathea would have made it not an exclusively family tomb. And so that way we can include Matthew in this bunch and make him historical.
Well, that's just, again, undermining the very argument that might lend some plausibility to it. It is and it is not the precise equivalent of the family members of Jesus in the New Testament. Which is it? Because if there's a Matthew in there, you're and a Sarah and so on, forget it. There's just no reason to think it's this particular group.
Yeah, one of the things that the garden tomb, the lost tomb of Jesus, hinges on, their argument hinges on the James ossuary and the presence of Mary Magdalene's ossuary. That they maintain that there is a Mary in that tomb, and that they say that she's Mary Magdalene, and they base that argument on the one of the apocrypha. I think they said it was like the Gospel of Philip.
Yeah, where it says that. Yeah. Well, there is a mention of her there is both the Gospel of Philip and an Acts of Philip, unrelated really, but in the, I don't even know what the Acts of Philip says, but Mary Magdalene is mentioned in the Gospel of Philip in this interesting passage where it says Jesus loved, or the Savior loved Mary Magdalene and often kissed her on the blank, because there's a hole in the manuscript there, and it's presumably it's on the mouth, on the lips, and the disciples ask him, why do you love Mary Magdalene more than us? And he says, to paraphrase it, what you ought to be asking is why I don't love you as much as I love her. And apparently this fits in with a widespread Gnostic notion, and this is definitely a Gnostic text, Valentinian, that Mary Magdalene was the greatest of the apostles, and she was a woman who knew the all, like in the Pistis Sophia and the Dialogue of the Savior and other Gnostic texts. She is the one that understands best, and Peter even resents her prominence and tries to shut her up. And this seems to be clearly a piece of that tradition. Well, some have, also the Gospel of Philip uses the imagery of kissing as a euphemism, which was common in the day for sex. But in the Gospel of Philip, in other references, it's a short book, but even at that, there are other references that show that means spiritual begetting. The Gnostics weren't interested in actual sex, and so if he has sex with someone, he has begotten a disciple, etc. So some say, well, yeah, that's the symbolism of it. But isn't that evidence that he was actually married to her? Well, that's possible, but that's by no means clear. It's not what the text is trying to say, and that's about it. I mean, it's possible that Jesus and Mary both existed, and that they were married, but again, that's just really pure speculation. Now, in framing historical hypotheses, you inevitably do speculate. You say, now, what if the facts were put together this way, would it make better sense? That is, would you now have a place for everything and everything in its place, and it all seems to lock together, whereas on other interpretations, it's just a random bunch of data? Well, yeah, you have to do that, and it's somewhat circular, but you check and see, like Bultmann said about the hermeneutical circle. You raise certain questions, you bring to the evidence, you see how well it meshes. If it doesn't, back to the drawing board. Let's find another hypothesis, another heuristic theory to make sense of it. Well, I think that that's what's happening here, but that Tabor is jumping the gun. He should go back to the drawing board. He's saying, gee, now, what if these Bible-sounding names were together as the same configuration they are in the Gospels? Wouldn't that imply this might be the tomb? But he has to take a closer look and see that, gee, what do you know? They're not. They're extra ones and so on. I guess not. So I think he should have gone back to the drawing board, but he doesn't. By now, it's a hobby horse that he's committed to, and I think it's just a chain of weak links.
I think he's trying to sell books, if not to be unkind, but...
Well, it could be, but that really doesn't matter much in terms of the possible validity of what he says, and I suspect he's just so taken with this possibility. He finds it so fascinating, and if it were true, boy, what a big deal it would be, that he just he's just pushing it for all it's worth to see if maybe it's true, and it's exciting. But I just think, I don't want to say he's lost perspective. That makes it sound like he's crazy. I wouldn't say that for a second. I have great respect for him, but I just can't see this. And I think he's just like, and in a way, it's good. I mean, if you propose any theory, like I advocate tentatively the old Christ myth theory. Now, I know it's just a theory. I think it's highly plausible, but I don't take offense that people have great resistance to this. Any theory in science, history, whatever, has to run the gauntlet and try to answer all of the critics and criticisms, because if it doesn't, we can't tell if it really has what it takes to be accepted. This is like continental drift, right? People thought that was crazy at first, and it was good that they didn't just say, okay, what the heck, let's all believe that. They had to demand the evidence, and then it took a while, but they found it, and they said, okay, everybody believes it now. So I can't blame Tabor for pushing it as far as he can to see if it really does come out in the wash, but it just seems to me we already can see it's arbitrary and really highly speculative. I don't really take it seriously, but then again, I know what it's like to have people not take your view seriously. I say more power to them. Let them keep exploring it.
Well, I definitely see the merit in exploring the theory. Like that's what should happen. Those theories should stand up to scrutiny. But I think what Tabor's doing is every time his theory is scrutinized, he looks at something else and he says, oh, well, look at this. This is anomalous, so this must mean... And then he continues that chain of speculation. For instance, on the Jesus ossuary, there's a cross on it. Like it looks more like an X, less of a cross. And he says, see, this is the Jesus ossuary. It has a cross on it. And then somebody says, well, that really isn't a cross because, the cross as a symbol of Christianity didn't show up until centuries later. And so then he says, oh, well, Jesus said that he was the Alpha and the Omega. And at the end of his life, the Omega, the Hebrew symbol for the last letter in the alphabet, would be like this X. So that's what that is. And so he's building speculation upon speculation to defend a diminishing number of evidences
That's very well put, and that's a great example. I didn't know or had forgotten that he said that in particular, because where did Jesus say he was the Alpha and the Omega? In the book of Revelation. Is this even possibly relevant to the historical Jesus? Oh, boy.
Yeah. Well, and as a side note, like I said, his argument seems to hinge on the James ossuary and the Mary Magdalene ossuary. And like I said, I didn't really understand, because a lot of the Mary Magdalene stuff was translational, and it was a lot of epigraphy, and I didn't quite understand that. But the James ossuary was what they maintain is the missing ossuary, and and then it resurfaces, and the guy who had it was he was an antiquities collector. His name was like Oded Golan or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
And he's currently on trial for, just like you said, fabricating antiques. That he had like some kind of a forgery ring, and he's on trial now. And I think that they haven't delivered the verdict. But one of the pieces of evidence that they're holding up to maintain his innocence is that he has a picture of the James ossuary dated from 1976, and the Talpiot tomb wasn't opened until 1980. So whatever that James ossuary is, it did not come out of the Talpiot tomb. Whether it's a forgery or a fake or not, it didn't come from the Talpiot tomb.
Oh, my God, right. Oy vey. Yeah, that's a major hole if you're saying, look, we've got the names and just the names of Jesus' family. That is, if this one was originally in there. That's a mighty big if.
And I think it's funny. So they're sort of like they don't want to discredit the antiquities dealer Golan, because then that makes a lot of things fall apart. But then they also don't want him to be vindicated, because then the James ossuary falls apart.
I guess that's just one of those mysteries of faith where it seems to be a contradiction, but oh, brother, yeah, that is a knockdown argument. If people really embarrass themselves with that stupid bone box, Ben Witherington, who ought to be constantly cringing from embarrassment, he rushed to join the chorus, rejoicing in this thing, and even shockingly, John Dominic Crossan had a blurb for a Biblical Archaeology Review book about it, saying this is as close as we're liable to get to the historical Jesus, even though he had been on record as saying probably the body of Jesus had been thrown in a lime pit. I don't know why he thought this was a good idea even. But, well, I guess that was James, not Jesus. I suppose Crossan didn't know where this was going. Boy. Yeah, I just don't see anything in this, and I think it's kind of a reflection of the desperation that there is in documenting a historical Jesus. Since there isn't any real evidence, let's see if we can make up some. I don't mean that in Golan's sense, but let's see if we can find something that we can tell ourselves is real evidence of Jesus. Good luck.
This sort of slapshod put together archaeology. It reminds me of, you probably heard about it a couple of years ago. There was the nail found in the Caiaphas ossuary.
Yeah.
And people were jumping all over it, saying, "Oh, this is the nail from the cross where Jesus was crucified." And it's like, there are enough pieces of the one true cross.
Yep.
And
exactly.
nails of Christ to build an ark and nail it together.
Yeah, this is just relic mongering like in the old days, and that's all the Shroud of Turin, or as I like to call it, the fraud of Turin, is about. It's just relic mongering. Shake the hand that shook the hand.
So why do you think people are so desperate to prove this historical Jesus?
Well, because they want to believe in him. There's a sentimental attachment. Some are just concerned for theological reasons that they painted themselves into a corner. Christianity is the uniquely historical religion, and all of that, and it ultimately winds up saying, if Jesus really rose from the dead, a guy actually came back from the other side, then that means I can get a ticket to heaven too. If it turns out there's nothing to that and it just remains a big blank, we don't know what's going to happen on the other side, then people are mighty depressed. And though if it boils down to what Tabor says, and that they did really have a non-physical idea of resurrection, there is simply no reason to believe that. That's just no different than saying Jesus died and went to heaven like your Uncle Mordecai. What's the big deal? What is the value of that if that is what they thought? I don't know. I don't really see it as important, and there is no way this what if kind of thing could be considered vindicating data. And I know somebody listening is going to say, well, Price, you're so hypocritical. Aren't you dealing in pure speculation? And my answer is, of course I am. That's what all history is. You can't dogmatize about the stuff. The problem is when people claim to be historians and they're just dogmatizing. All historical judgments, quote unquote, are provisional and tentative. You are eager to find information that, quote, debunks what you thought, because it just means you're at least getting a bit closer to the truth by getting further away from error. That's what theologians say, at least in the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's called the via negativa, the negative way. That, look, like I was saying before about the Trinity, if there is an infinite God, no human mind could grasp him. So can theology describe God? Well, of course not, but we could at least get rid of stupid, inadequate ideas of God. We'd be less confused than we were. That's the way it is in history, too. We don't expect to know exactly what happened with things like this. And that's why it's so suspicious when somebody comes up with something like this that appears to be a hobby horse. So, it's got to be true. It's got to be true. You see, this proves it, too. I don't buy it.
I was wondering about this. You kind of touched on it a little bit, because I don't think theologically speaking, Tabor doesn't have a dog in the race. I don't think he really cares one way or the other. I really think he's just maybe trying to sell books. But even if you allow everything is true, this is the ossuary of Christ. These are his bones. He was married to Mary Magdalene, had a son. If all of that was true, what would it mean for Christianity at large?
Well, there is the question of, does this mean the earliest Christians believed in a merely spiritual resurrection? And that is so anticlimactic and so vague. I just think that would be a major blow to any apologetics, for one thing. As to Jesus being married and having kids, that brings up the Da Vinci Code nonsense. There is nothing. Let me put on my theological defender's hat here. There is nothing in the Orthodox Christology that Jesus was God and man. He was a divine, one person with a divine nature and a human nature. Nothing implies he couldn't have been married and had kids. There's nothing in there about marriage being evil. Jesus is shown not to be an ascetic like John the Baptist, eschewing food and wine and social company. There's no reason to think he couldn't have been married. It never says he wasn't. And if you say, well, wait a minute now, suppose he did marry Mary Magdalene or anybody else and had kids, does that make them demigods or something? Well, I don't think that's a reductio ad absurdum, as people are trying to say. It's an interesting question. I mean, again, you're assuming that Jesus was the God man. It's an interesting question, but it certainly doesn't rule out the possibility. So I don't think that is theologically important. The merely spiritual resurrection would be sort of disquieting, though. Again, I guess that wouldn't technically kick a hole in the hull of the theology. It would just make it more arbitrary to believe in it.
Yeah, the spiritual resurrection, I think, might be a problem.
Yeah, it's just that since they're so cagey about what it is anyway, you read N.T. Wright and all these guys that John R.W. Stott, the old and new apologists, they admit that they have an unstable idea that we don't really know what a spiritual body would have been like, but I guess it explains how Jesus could teleport different places and could apparently walk through closed doors and yet eat. Well, I think you just have a confused picture, inconsistent resurrection stories, but they're already willing to say that Jesus was like the Martian Manhunter in the Justice League, that he could change his density at will. Look, if you're going to say that, forget it. You are a docetist. You are already admitting he had no true physical form. So that's what it means in the Greek myths, where the gods can take various forms. Then, like Zeus impregnates these women. In one story, he turns into a bull and impregnates a woman. In another, he becomes a shower of gold coins that falls on the woman and she's pregnant. Another, I think he's a breeze that impregnates the woman. In other words, he had no true physical form, and that's what's implied in these gospel stories. And then again, 1 Corinthians 15 just says he rose with a spiritual body. Look, if you're going to say that, you're practically already saying there was a merely spiritual resurrection. So what the heck? It's just they don't like to admit that because it means, well, it's arbitrary. It's like the Jehovah's Witnesses expecting Christ to return personally in 1914, and then it didn't happen. So they said, well, he did return, but it was spiritual, and he's up there in heaven reigning over the earth in some sense that he wasn't before 1914. Yeah, sure, anything you say. So there's great disquiet over that possibility, but it wouldn't be actually much different than what they're saying already, but don't really want to admit.
That's all right. I don't even know what to say after that.
We
That
have
was such
5
a
minutes.
good, rundown.
So,
Bob, go.
I was just going to say, if we're running out of time, you made me think about when you were talking about apologetics and apologists at large, and obviously the greatest apologist ever was C.S. Lewis, and I am so intrigued with your book, The Needle Toe Letters. Like, because I really like the Screw Tape Letters. I enjoyed them quite a bit. And
Me too.
And so now I just saw that you have the book, The Needle Toe Letters, and I think that's going to be a scream.
Well, my goal there is, though I love the Screw Tape Letters, and it was the first religious book I ever read, I think it's so clever and so insightful. I think, however, that he's wrong. It's all based on a highly dubious premise, and you could just flip it over. And so my idea is that the angel needle toe, which of course is based on how many angels can dance on the point of a pin, he is coaching his nephew Wiltwing on how to keep his Christian charge befuddled and deceived by illogic and so forth. And why do the angels do this? Well, because they feed off of the pious guilt feelings and spiritual zeal of human beings. It's just the reverse of Lewis's thing, and so that they are really the insidious ones. And then at the end, Wiltwing asks him, well, if we're deceiving about there being a God and so on, well, what are we? And at the end, he says, "Don't you realize by now we're figments of their imagination?" And so I try to lay out the most important dodges and rationalizations and bogus arguments that are used to keep people in evangelical Christianity. And I think I like to think it's a worthy rejoinder, though that's a tall order with Lewis.
Yeah, I've got that one on order. I saw it. I was like, I got to order this. This is on its way.
Well, somehow the third letter was left out of it initially, and I think they've corrected that. But if you get it without the third letter, let me know and I'll send it to you.
Well, I ordered it on Amazon. Will that come with the third letter? Or?
I think it should, because the guy that processed it into an ebook assured me that after someone pointed out that the letter 3 was missing, that he'd correct that. I don't know if I never got a copy of it on an ebook since I have the original, so I don't know if it's corrected. It should be.
Okay,
but,
I'll double check it.
Oh boy,
We should wrap it up.
Yeah, definitely about that time. So, Dr. Price, you want to take us out? Anything you want to plug? Any new books in the works? I know you have a library of them that you've written, essentially. If not on the subject we're talking about, then on Lovecraft. And we're big Lovecraft fans too, so.
Well, I have from coming out eventually from Centipede Press that does like real luxury editions of things, boxed, slip-cased books and all that, a 5-volume annotated edition of Lovecraft that I put together with grouped by genres. Like there's one that's Lovecraft's Cthulhu Mythos Tales from the Nameless City to At the Mountains of Madness, called Azathoth and Other Horrors. Each one has a book title that Lovecraft used, but not on any of his actual books. Another one has to do with his revision mythos stories, another with his traditional supernaturalism, another with his dreamland stories, and another his juvenilia. And with a long essay introducing each book, and then an essay introducing every stinking story in there. So that should be, we're going to have interesting illustrations and such. I've just finished my part of a book that'll be an ebook probably, called Evolving Out of Eden, Christian Responses to Evolution, on which I'm collaborating with Ed Suominen, whose idea it was. And that's I've dealt with like creationists and the recent evangelical and Catholic pro-evolutionists trying to harmonize it, and I think that's a pretty good one. I'm not sure how long Ed will take on his part of it, but we estimate that'll be out probably in May. So that's my latest. And then there's also a collection called The Jury Is In, most of which has been available on Internet Infidels for years, but American Atheist Press is putting it out as a book, and I have about 3 essays in that. So I hope that'll appear before too long.
It's pretty excellent.
Website?
I want to plug one of your books that's been really helpful to me, and I'll have it right here on camera. It's the Pre-Nicene New Testament.
Oh,
this thing is a bug crusher.
Yeah.
For anyone who can see my video, it's very, very thick, very, very authoritative tome. I love it. And I'm getting to work on what's going to be my second book, and this is actually very helpful because you have the Gospel of Marcion in here.
Yeah, one reconstruction of it.
Yeah.
Some people would have slightly different ideas, but I think it's pretty accurate.
Yeah. So, definitely, any of the listeners out there, Dr. Price has plenty of books. It'd take you a lifetime to read them, I'm sure. So,
What's your website, Dr. Price?
robertmprice.mindvendor.com, and vendor is D-O-R, not D-E-R. That's got my short fiction, my sermons, reviews, essays on comic books, my Zarathustra Speaks column, my theological publications, and just all kinds of stuff.
So when are we going to see you writing the
hit
next?
parade too?
Oh, yeah. My list of stuff you really have to read to be an initiate into biblical criticism and theology.
Yeah, but when are you going to write the next issue of Justice League?
Oh, I would love to get into comic writing. I love certain comics these days. I'm a big fan of the various Avengers series from Marvel. I sort of jumped off the bus with DC once they did the reboot recently, but I don't like what I hear about that.
Yeah, you're not missing anything.
But the Avengers comics by Brian Michael, what do you think of them?
I haven't read the Bendis stuff yet, but I am excited for the movie.
No, I'm sorry, I mean the DC's, these rebooted DC New Universe things.
Some of them are hit or miss, and you know, and I think that the ones that should be hits that aren't are the Superman titles, but they're kind of weak.
Yeah, I love Superman. I can't believe they changed the costume. I know they've done it before, but only temporarily. And apparently Superman is a jerk in the new reckoning. I'm just not interested. I'm reading more and more of these archives of the Silver Age Superman back when it was fun. That to me is the real vital mythology, the comic book heroes and science fiction and so forth. That is really the modern equivalent of the ancient myths.
Yeah, well, I can't think of anybody better to write the new Justice League arc.
I'll never get access to it, that's for sure. Though I do have a book I'm putting out, getting together. I love Robert E. Howard and Lynn Carter and all these guys with the sword and sorcery fiction that was so popular in the 40s and then again in the 60s. And I'm putting together a couple of anthologies called The Mighty Warriors that'll have new material with several of the major sword and sorcery characters from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Awesome. And I hope Daw Books will put that out, but that's not certain yet.
Awesome.
That sounds awesome.
Fantastic. We really appreciate you being on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a great honor.
Well, no, the honor is all ours.
We're supposed to be.
Yeah, it definitely took a little while to get this all up and running today, but
nobody knows but
okay.
us. But
Yeah. Well, just so they know how hard we worked. So.
Yeah. Oh, great talking with you.
Yeah, it's definitely great talking to you. Any listeners out there? If you have any questions, comments, something you want us to cover, you can call us 757-337-2195. You can email us nonreligious@zombie-popcorn.com. You can like us on Facebook, facebook.com/thisnonreligiouslife. You can go to Google Plus and put us in your circles there. We're on Stitcher Radio.
And if you have a BMW, Stitcher just announced a partnership with BMW. You can now listen to our show if you drive a BMW in your car.
That's so.
And if you own a Ford, new Ford, you can listen to us.
Really?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Go on.
iTunes. You can go there. You can rate the show, leave feedback. YouTube, of course. It's all on the website, zombie-popcorn.com. You can go there and sign up for the newsletter once a week. Get updates about all the shows that we put out. Our show, Talking Dead, The Natural Ones, Bob's other show, which is excellent, by the way.
It's going up today.
And if you stay tuned, my book should be debuting shortly. You can pick it up.
What is that?
It's a source critical version of the Pentateuch.
Oh.
Yeah, I color-coded it and added my own annotations.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way,
I couldn't find a good one. I couldn't find a good one that was out, so.
Yeah,
my
there
own.
have been various things like the old polychrome Bible back in the early 20th century, but they never even finished that. That's a mighty handy tool. Oh, if I could shamelessly plug something else, I do, about 5 days a week, a podcast called The Bible Geek. And then I think it's available on, I guess you can find it on Google. I can't really tell you how the heck it, I think it shows up on Ustream, though. And then I am starting a new one. I've done the first of a similar podcast called The Human Bible that's on a few radio stations and will be broadcast by Center for Inquiry in Amherst, or podcast, I should say. So I answer listener questions and stuff like that.
That's excellent. Bob and I both actually listen to Bible Geek. I know you get my questions every now and then. So that's excellent.
Great.
So I guess that just about does it for today. Like I said, check out more of Dr. Price's stuff, and stay tuned for next week.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for
Yeah,
coming.
thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
All right.
Just got out here.
I thought I was a good Christian.
Jesus died on a cross. I go to church every Sunday. Just got out here. Then I read this. It says Jesus died on a cross for a rotten hooker.
I thought I was a good Christian.
I go to church every Sunday.
I thought I was a good Christian.
I go to church every Sunday. I'm a very religious person.
I thought I was a good Christian.
The very lies the serpent told to Eve in the Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion and promote lies. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Spread confusion.